This old thing, with all of its parts exposed and painted barn red, at least what's left of the paint anyway. This old thing is a hit-and-miss stationary engine built in 1915. And I need to tell you right now that I really like this old thing. I like it as much as a fat kid likes cake, and the last time I checked, that's quite a lot. And this old thing is up next on Shit Gets Fixed. Hello and welcome back to the shop and another episode of Shit Gets Fixed, where we use your likes and subscribes to offset the financial burden for people fighting cancer. You're wondering, what does all that mean? Well, the long and the short of it is, we create this content and put it up on YouTube, hoping that people like you will subscribe to our channel. Once we have enough people like you, subscribers, Google, who owns YouTube, will start sending my nonprofit money, because while you're watching this channel's amazing content, you will see some advertisements. It's called ad revenue sharing. You've heard the word monetization tossed around. I mean, you get it. Anyway, so Google is going to send my nonprofit money, and we, meaning the nonprofit, is going to turn it right back around and give that money directly to people fighting cancer. Some of them fighting for their lives, and they need our help. So, if you want to be a philanthropist, be part of this incredible Shit Gets Fixed team, all you need to do is press the subscribe button, watch our content from start to finish, and maybe post a comment about how incredible this all is. That's it. And now you're a philanthropist. And you've always wanted to be a philanthropist. Now, you're asking yourself, how can this possibly be so simple? Well, go to our nonprofit website at www.shitgetsfixed.org. And that will explain how and why we make this magic happen. Alrighty, let's fix some shit. We are going to fix some shit on the 1915 Satley hit and miss. And to get us started, I have a little bit of hit and miss history for us. So, in 1915, you could order one of these Satleys through the Montgomery Ward catalog. It even says Montgomery Ward right here on the name tag. Hit and miss engines were used from the 1890s through the late 1930s, primarily in rural parts of America. These engines would be connected to other machines by a flat leather belt, and they would run water pumps, generators, even some ran washing machines. And you could say they were nothing short of a game changer on the early American farm. And speaking of this flat leather belt interconnection, I've taken this opportunity to connect the Satley, albeit kind of a mock-up, with this. This is a flat belt driven power hacksaw built in 1909 by the Racine Gas Engine Company of Racine, Wisconsin. I did this so you could see how hit and miss engines' power would be transferred via that flat belt to another machine, like the 1909 power hacksaw. Man, that's neat! So the shit we need to fix is as follows. First, we need to install this. This is a primer cup. I'll talk about what this does when we get there. We also need to set the ignition timing, but before we can do any of that, we need to do some repair work on the Webster tripolar oscillator. And no, I didn't just make that up. The Webster tripolar oscillator is actually a thing. So I'm going to get after removing the Webster from the Satley so we can fix that shit. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to send you over to the inspection stand so you can review the typical 4-stroke combustion process, and then I'll bring you back over here so we can talk about how hit and miss engines manipulate that process. The 4-stroke engine cycle involves 4 piston strokes, and the first of them is the intake stroke. The piston moves down during the intake stroke, drawing in an air-fuel mixture into the cylinder through the open intake valve. The intake valve in a modern engine is typically held open by a rocker arm, or a camshaft, or a pushrod, or some combination of them. And the air-fuel mixture is drawn into the cylinder because a vacuum happens in the cylinder when the piston moves down, much like how a syringe draws in fluid when you pull on the plunger. Next up is the compression stroke, and just before the compression stroke starts, the intake valve closes. Then the piston moves up in the cylinder, squeezing the air-fuel mixture into a smaller space. And that leads us to the power stroke. And just before the power stroke happens, the air-fuel mixture ignites and an explosion occurs. These explosive forces drive the piston down. This power stroke is the hit in the hit and miss name given to our stationary engine. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Now the last of our 4 strokes, the exhaust stroke. And as the exhaust stroke is happening, the exhaust valve is held open, again by a rocker arm or a camshaft or a pushrod or some combination of them. And as the piston moves up in the cylinder, the spent air-fuel gases are pushed out that open exhaust valve, just like when we push down on the plunger of that syringe. And then the 4-stroke process starts over again. That is unless you have some sort of clapped out pile of garbage that simply will not stay running. Hit and miss engines are mostly 4-stroke engines, and of course, they follow the 4-stroke process just explained. But they add one step, or maybe it's better to say they pause or halt the 4-stroke process from repeating right after the exhaust stroke, the last of those 4 strokes. And this pause or halt is the miss in the hit and miss name. Now, to be clear, the engine is still turning during this miss. In fact, they can miss several 4-stroke cycles and keep coasting along before hitting again. So now we know when the hit and the miss occur during the 4-stroke process. The hit is the power stroke, and the miss is the pause or halt of the 4-stroke process from starting over, right after the exhaust stroke. And these engines take advantage of 3 design features to accomplish this hit and miss business. First is their mass. Hit and miss engines are big and heavy. Second, they utilize an atmospheric intake valve. And third is most of them are flyweight or flyball governed. And I will explain more about these 3 features in just a bit. Now, I know, lots of talking here, so bear with me. Anyway, hit and miss engines are designed to run at a specific RPM, or revolutions per minute, no matter if they're driving a machine like the power hacksaw or just sitting here running on its own. To help achieve this, they take advantage of those 3 features I just mentioned. And the first of them is their mass. In particular, their large, heavy flywheels. Those heavy flywheels store and release kinetic energy by absorbing the power from the hit and then releasing it gradually during the miss, somewhat smoothing out the overall power delivery. This allows them to miss and coast along and not just stop dead in their tracks. Next is that atmospheric intake valve. So on a modern 4-stroke engine, the valves are opened and sometimes even closed by those rocker arms or camshafts or push rods or some combination of them. But on most hit and miss engines, There's none of that stuff operating the intake valve. None at all. There's only a light-duty spring keeping the valve closed and the effects of an atmospheric pressure differential overcoming that spring tension to open it. And oh yeah, lots of big words there. But I have an idea to show you how this atmospheric valve thing works. This is my idea, and I call it the AIVD, or Atmospheric Intake Valve Demonstrator. So this demonstrator demonstrates how the atmospheric intake valve interacts with the intake stroke, the first of the 4 strokes at the beginning of the 4-stroke internal combustion process. And representing the piston and cylinder is the large syringe. So what I'm going to do is pull out on the plunger, and that's going to create a low pressure area or a slight vacuum in the cylinder of the syringe. This will cause the valve to open and allow the higher pressure or atmospheric pressure, that's the stuff out here, to move into the low pressure area and equalize the two. Once they have equalized, the valve will close. Alrighty, let's demonstrate the demonstrator. So when this all happens on the hit and miss engine, what's included in that higher pressure or atmospheric charge entering the cylinder is some sort of flammable liquid vapor like gasoline. So when the piston comes back up on the next stroke, that's the compression stroke, there's an air-fuel mixture in the cylinder, and we get that explosion that will drive the piston down. That's the hit, or the power stroke. Wow, is that neat! Now, for as long as I've been working around these antique engines with atmospheric intake valves, and that's the better part of my adult life, I've always assumed that the atmospheric intake valve was being sucked or pulled open by the vacuum or low pressure zone in the cylinder created as the piston moves down. Well, that assumption is wrong. The atmospheric intake valve isn't being sucked or pulled open, but rather it's being pushed open by the higher pressure zone. That's the stuff out here. It's in the same way that exhaust gases don't get sucked out of an engine, but rather they get pushed out past the exhaust valve and out the muffler, because on the exhaust stroke, the piston is moving up in the cylinder, and it's creating a higher pressure zone, higher than what's out here. I know, it's crazy, right? But if you really want to get crazy, talk to a physicist about how a vacuum cleaner works. So now we know how and when the atmospheric intake valve works, and the important role it plays in the hit and miss process. But it also plays a very important role in the miss. And that brings us to the last of those three features hit and miss engines utilized I mentioned way back when. And that's the fact that they are flyweight or flyball governed. So these flyweight or flyball governing systems are made up of springs and weights, and they are under the influence of centripetal forces and are tuned to those forces to tell the hit and miss engine when to hit and when to miss, controlling the cadence or speed or how fast the engine should go, keeping it as close to its designed RPM as possible. And that differs from, let's say, a car. In that case, the driver is the governing system. That's because cars are throttle governed. Let's head out to my driveway and I'll show you what I mean. So this is my 1972 Volkswagen camper van. And let's say I'm driving down the road and I want to go faster. I would press down on the accelerator pedal. And then I would go faster. Now, if I wanted to slow down a little, I would let off the accelerator pedal. And I would slow down. That's because the accelerator pedal is connected to a carburetor in my case, or a fuel injection system, or some sort of rheostat in a more modern car. And those systems control how much power the engine or electric motor produce and how fast you go. More pedal, more power, the faster you go. Less pedal, less power, the slower you go. It's kind of like a dimmer switch on a light in your house. But hit and miss engines don't control their speed that way. They do the more hit, more power, the faster they go. The more miss, the less power, the slower they go. It's kind of an all or nothing approach. It's either on or it's off. And remember, even though it's off, it's still turning or coasting along with help from those big heavy flywheels. And this all or nothing is controlled by those flyweight or flyball governing systems. All right, let's head back inside because I have something really neat to show you. And it's this. This is the second demonstrator I made, and it's called an HAHAMD, or Highly Advanced Hit and Miss Demonstrator. Now, I'm going to give you a moment to take it all in so your totally blown mind can adjust. Let me walk you around the highly advanced hit and miss demonstrator. We have our piston and cylinder, the atmospheric intake valve, the exhaust valve, our exhaust valve, rocker arm, and push rod. This black thumb screw represents the flyweight or flyball governing system. The green zone represents when the hit and miss engine is turning at or below its designed RPM. And the red area represents when the engine is turning way too fast or over its designed RPM. And last but not least, we have our camshaft. So this demonstrator demonstrates the step-by-step hit and miss process. And first up is when our stationary engine is operating at or below its designed RPM speed. And we start with the intake stroke. And you can see that the atmospheric intake valve did its thing. Next, the compression stroke, then the power stroke. Now the cam does its thing and it pushes the push rod, which rocks the rocker and opens the exhaust valve. Then finally, the exhaust stroke. And this process repeats as long as the hit and miss engine is at or below its designed RPM. And this hit, hit, hit without any misses usually occurs when we are under load or connected to another machine. Next is the step-by-step process when our stationary engine is operating too fast or above its designed RPM. But first, we need to get our hit-and-miss engine going, and we need at least one hit cycle to do that. So first is the intake stroke, and the atmospheric valve does its thing. Then compression, then power. Now the cam does its thing and pushes the push rod, which rocks the rocker and opens the exhaust valve. And finally, the exhaust stroke. And because we are not connected to another machine, our hit-and-miss engine is now turning way too fast. It's above its designed RPM. And the flyweight or flyball governing system does its thing. And its thing is to hold the push rod in its pushed position. And that holds the rocker in the rocked position, which holds the exhaust valve open. And now we are in that miss mode, that pause or halt after the exhaust stroke. And this is what happens. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Nothing happens. We just coast along. It's because the exhaust valve is held open by the governing system, and we can't develop a low pressure area or vacuum in the cylinder, and therefore the atmospheric intake valve can't do its thing. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Nothing. But sooner or later, our big heavy flywheels will release that stored kinetic energy, and our hit-and-miss engine will slow down and start to turn at or below its designed RPM. And then the governing system releases the push rod, and the rocker unrocks, and the exhaust valve closes. And then the next time around during the intake stroke, the atmospheric valve does its thing, and we get a hit cycle. And this dance between the hits and the misses repeats. Man, is that neat! Yeah, that is pretty neat. And now we know how hit-and-miss engines manipulate that four-stroke internal combustion process, and how they utilize those big heavy flywheels and that atmospheric intake valve in those flyweight or flyball governing systems to do it. And I've spent way too much time talking about all this, so I think we should take a break here. Let all this hit-and-miss business marinate a while. We'll come back in a few weeks and finish up all the shit we still need to fix on the Sattly in part 2. And I look forward to seeing you then. So, as always, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.